So thank you all for joining us today for Freestar's industry discussion on the truth about publisher traffic. My name is Heather Carver. I'm Freestar's Chief Revenue Officer, and I'll be moderating today's panel with several esteemed industry experts who will be bringing diverse perspectives to our discussion today. And throughout our conversation, everyone on the call, feel free to ask questions in the comments box. We'll do our best to address in real time. We'll also do a Q&A at the end of the panel. So if you put questions in there and we don't address them, we can always go back at the end. And before I introduce today's speaker, I really want to give a high-level overview to set the stage of what we're going to talk about today. As many of you on this call are keenly aware, over the last year, and even more than a year, quite frankly, publishers have been facing increased headwinds as it relates to driving both paid and organic traffic to their sites. And in July of 2023, EchoBox, it's a publisher research-focused tech company that helps publishers to optimize their content, release their annual publishing trends report. And in that report, they cited that 47% of publishers said that declining traffic is their number one challenge, hence why we're here talking about that today, with 63% stating that increased traffic is to their websites is their top priority. And in the report, EchoBox cites declines in Facebook referral traffic as having a major impact, with the industry data showing a drop of Facebook referral traffic from 27% in January of 2018 down to 11% in April of 2023. And I think that only continues to decline. Additionally, there's always constant changes to Google's algorithms that impact publisher traffic. There have been a slew of changes over the last couple of months, but starting as early as 2013, Google started displaying quick answers at the top of search engine result pages, which really summarized content from around the web, and it pushed organic search links further down the page and really oftentimes gave consumers enough information that they didn't even really need to visit websites, obviously impacting publishers who are focusing on content and trying to drive traffic to their sites. And the newest version of this that was recently rolled out by Google is their AI-powered search called Search Generative Experience. And if pubs want to opt out of having their content used for this AI-powered search by Google product, they need to use the same tool that actually prevents them from showing up in Google's organic search links. So a little bit of a conundrum there. And according to an Adweek article published in Q3, experts predict that Google Search Generative Experience could reduce up to 80% of a publisher's organic search traffic if implemented in its current form. So major changes there. There's obviously other changes in social with Twitter, other Google changes, as I mentioned, but I just want to call out some of the major impacts here with Facebook and the Google Search Generative Experience. So in today's discussion, we'll focus on the reality of publisher declining traffic and what publishers can do in response to this. We'll also talk about today's hot topic. I'm sure at some point it will come up, made for advertising. Chris Kane just did a publisher webinar on this about a week ago. Still not clearly defined what that is, but it really takes aim at publishers leaning into paid traffic sources, including paid search, social, and content recommendation platforms. So Chris Kane, who is joining us for today's chat, summarized it well yesterday in a post on LinkedIn. He said, the buy side is rewarding organic traffic at the same time that big aggregators like Facebook and Google are distributing less of it. So what are pubs to do? So now I'm going to pass things over to today's speakers to introduce themselves, tell us about their areas of expertise. So Chris, I'm going to start with you, given that I just called you out, and then we can follow up with Lindsay and Rachel, and then we'll get started with the discussion. So over to you, Chris.
Sure. My name's Chris Kane. I run a company called Jounce Media. We're a research business with a very narrow focus. We try to understand with as much rigor as we can the way that money moves from DSPs to publishers. And that spans a variety of things that are out of scope for today, but most relevant for today, we've spent a lot of our time over the last 2.5 to 3 years trying to understand the ways in which certain publishers have become very dependent on paid traffic, and the ways in which publishers that have an outsized dependence on paid traffic can kind of successfully consume a lot of advertiser budget, but do it in a way that doesn't actually create business outcomes for marketers. That's the made for advertising category Heather was talking about. And I guess just to sort of like frame up where I think I can provide useful perspective, but also where I can't today. I very much look at the industry from the perspective of the buy side. I think I have a pretty good handle on the way that buyers experience programmatic supply. And I think, frankly, I still have a lot to learn about the way that publishers source traffic and the way that publishers kind of manage a mixture of different paid traffic sources and different sources of organic traffic.
Thank you. I can go next. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Lindsay Valdez. I work for Freestar as the VP of Audience Strategy. I work specifically with publishers on traffic growth and audience strategies to help improve the quality and quantity of traffic, or historically it has been that way for publishers. I got started about 15 years ago in SEO, but have been working the last 10 years in some way with publishers, either through Freestar in a situation where I'm working amongst many, or in-house at various media companies.
And then I'll go. Thanks, Lindsay. I'm Rachel DeSchepper. I'm the lead content strategist at Andrews McMeel Universal, which is an independent and global media company based in Kansas City. We were rooted in a syndicate model where we syndicate comics and puzzles and advice columns. So you might have heard of Dear Abby or The Far Side or Doonesbury or any of those brands that are very well known. I've worked in digital content and editorial for the last 15 years and print magazine publishing for 3 years prior to that, focusing primarily on organic content creation, writing, editing, SEO, and social media. So kind of the flip side of what Chris said, I think, where I am still learning and I'll have more to talk about on this panel from the organic perspective, and then have a lot to learn about what's going on the buy side and the advertising side of things. So when you all mentioned the headwinds that publishers are facing, I feel you.
It's been a year.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, thanks, Chris, Lindsay, and Rachel for the intros. So now we'll move into the discussion, so the meat of what we're all here to hear today. So I'm going to start with Rachel from the publisher perspective, and I would love to hear from you as the lead content strategist at AMU. What changes have you faced over the past year as it relates to driving traffic to your sites?
Yeah, it's a lot of the things that you mentioned, Heather. It's like you mentioned, the drop in Facebook referrals has been dramatic. And it has always been one of those things. I mean, social media in general, it's always been one of those things where I think as publishers, we always knew that we shouldn't have all of our eggs in one basket. We knew that. And yet it was something that just kept working, and it worked for a really long time. And it's not anymore. Even, we have one site where for our ad supported models, we do not have any paid traffic, but for one site that we have that is not ad supported, we do have paid. And even there, it's just a nut that we can't quite crack from a Facebook perspective. So much so that we've really shifted focus from Facebook from a social perspective almost entirely. And for us, X, which is so weird to say, / formerly known as Twitter, was never a huge traffic driver. Past sites and past magazines and publishers that I've been at, that's never been the role of Twitter. And it's also very dependent on your brand. For us, it has always been something that is an engagement, conversation, community platform. And with all of the turmoil there, it's not even that anymore. It feels kind of like a wasteland. And so we're left like, okay, what does that mean for our brands? And for all three of our brands, we have 3: U Express, Go Comics, which are ad-supported sites, and then the Puzzle Society, which is not. All 3 are very different, but it's like, how do we shift these things that used to be so tried and true? not only that, like you talked about with search, there were months where Google Discover was just gangbusters for us. And I don't know if anybody, I'll drop it in the chat later, but Lily Ray is a SEO guru, and she wrote this incredible piece about the volatility of Discover, which will explain it far better than I ever can. But it's like one of those things where it's feast or famine. One day you get picked up and it's incredible, and then the next day you don't. And there's not a lot of insight into why. Even John Mueller from Google he's like, we don't know. It's like, it's just, it is what it is. So we see that. And then the generative AI, I think, and we'll get into this a little bit later. I think the thing that is so groundbreaking about that technology is not only is it forcing results further down the page, but it's also aggregating content in a way that worries me. Like, is it going to be such an aggregate that then all content means nothing? Like, if everything is everything for everyone, then ultimately it's meaningless. And so then I think for publishers, it's like, oh my gosh, how do you even differentiate your content even further and have an experience that is so different than what you can get from an aggregated generative AI result on the SERPs? So it's just another challenge. Yeah. And I think another big thing for us too is that we're realizing there's an increased reliance on our owned channels. And again, it kind of goes back to what we always knew, right? Like, you can't put all of your traffic driving reliance on channels you don't own. And it's, again, we all knew this, we all knew it. And so now we're shifting to, okay, primarily email, like, what are ways that you can engage your audience and drive traffic from channels that you do own? So yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's hard to wean yourself off of that, those traffic driving things. And, it's hard, like you said, feast or famine when you can see such success from it. But yeah, you're putting a lot of, energy into things you can't necessarily control.
You can't control.
We talk about that a lot, like controlling the controllable, which is, you can't control Google, you can't control Facebook, and they're going to have policy changes. So it looks like, everything's shifting toward taking more control in-house and seeing what you can do. Thank you for the overview from your perspective. And Lindsay, you've talked to hundreds of publishers this year. So from your perspective, would love to hear a little bit more on traffic loss happening to those other publishers. I'm sure a lot of the same, but anything, common themes or maybe new things to tease out from those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in large part, you can look at it two ways. There's been the actual referral sources that you and Rachel both spoke of that have diversifying traffic has always been a strategy, but it did not. Freestar, we have 800 to 1,200 publishers, somewhere in that bucket, that have some level of content. Some is very little, some, all of that kind of varies. But when you think about that, many of them were still getting Facebook traffic up until this past year, and that has really pulled back. Twitter was not always there as much. I think a couple things that are different though, and it was almost about, over a year ago, where all of a sudden you started talking about organic search, the discussion around somebody's brand, like the brand authority and strength. That piece was a little bit indicative of what was to come, in which you had to survive in a different way, and that the interfaces will all look different. I think there's so many unknowns and of how things are changing and where people will continue to get traffic. I've talked about how there hasn't been another big traffic source to come and replace Facebook or Twitter or anything that was driving. So you still have the same 10 most common traffic sources in a publisher's list, but they're just substantially less of a total because nothing's come in to drive more traffic. A little bit about when TikTok started coming into the picture and all of a sudden content was consumed differently in these little videos that didn't drive traffic. Instagram had this a little bit of a challenge where for the first round of social sources, even back to like the Pinterest, they drove traffic. The point was that the user went to the web page, and that has changed too. So those are the only two additions before we get into things further. It's just kind of been this process that this year was a lot of things came to head. Quality stronger than ever in every platform. It was like I kept talking about SEO benefits, but meanwhile it was like all the platforms publishers were benefiting by avoiding clickbait and cleaning up quality and doing the same kind of thing. And this year, I believe Google's algorithm just has been on overdrive, and their level that they could get to telling quality user experience. They just got it. It just really got very enhanced of an algorithm.
So it sounds like, as we move into today's reality and next year, with all these changes, I mean, every publisher at this point is probably going to have to buy some sort of traffic, right? And I think that's where we get into the talk and a little bit of the nervousness around MFA. And I think, Chris, you're doing a good job working across industry to kind of solidify on a definition of what MFA is. It's not just about buying traffic, right? But I think there are those concerns. So I think with Chris, when we speak about publishers needing to buy some traffic, doesn't mean they're an MFA pub, as we call it. I think on your conversation you had with publishers about a week ago, you joked that isn't every site made for ads. Yeah, so maybe the definition needs to be tweaked a little bit, but yes, there's a different parameters, like several different factors that you can look at outside of just buying traffic. But I'd be curious from your thoughts, Chris, on paid traffic and how do buyers perceive this today? Does it perform well? What's your take on that? Again, knowing that some publishers, even the most premium publishers out there that are brand names, are going to have to buy traffic too.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that are worth sort of clarifying on here. And I think I should just say up front, like these two things are both true and they're very much in tension with each other. Thing one is just underlining, Heather, something that you were saying, but I feel like it's worth repeating this like multiple times. I try to do this as often as I can. The standard, at least the one that we implement for identifying sites as MFA, is so drastically beyond identifying publishers that buy traffic. It is a tiny subset of publishers that are overwhelmingly dependent on paid traffic and that monetize the landing pages extremely aggressively and that fail to drive business outcomes for marketers. And I think I could do a better job, the whole industry could do a better job of sort of clarifying for sort of like mainstream publishers that the odds are extremely low that you're being identified as MFA. And I think the other thing that publishers should be demanding back from us and anybody else in the industry who's sort of generating a list of made for advertising publishers is clarity with no fee, with no strings attached of how your supply is currently being classified. I'm certainly happy to support that. I think anybody who's doing work like we are that's identifying MFA sites should be giving that level of transparency to publishers. But so point one is paid traffic is one requirement for being flagged as MFA, and there are many other requirements beyond that. And so publishers should not should not have a concern that if they just are buying traffic, even if they're buying a lot of traffic, that they're going to be flagged as MFA. That's thing one. Thing two, which is totally in tension with thing one, is I think the data is very clear and compelling that that user sessions that are a result of paid traffic are an inferior investment for marketers. That the business outcomes of buying ads for an organic visit to site xyz.com are superior and like vastly superior to the business outcomes of buying site XYZ when they acquire traffic, whether they acquire it from paid search or Facebook or a variety of other sources, just paid traffic does not perform as well for marketers. And so these things are intention, right? And so like, publishers that meet the standard of MFA are going to feel a lot of pain. I think they're feeling it already. It's going to get worse. But now set aside that little small slice of the market. Now you got like mainstream publishers, Heather, that you're talking about, who already today buy some traffic and probably are going to be buying more as a percent of their mix a year from now. It sure looks to me like those publishers are going to be a worse investment for marketers a year from now than they are today. And I don't know what we do about that. I feel stuck on that whole thing. That is a reality that's probably happening. Those publishers are not MFA, but as their traffic mix shifts toward paid, probably the effectiveness of their advertising products is going to go down.
Yes, but hopefully not get classified as MSA and completely blocked.
No, correct. Not be completely blocked.
So that middle ground.
DSPs are pretty good at figuring out, oh, site XYZ drives better outcomes than site ABC. And so I shift more. And like the publishers that become more and more dependent on paid traffic shouldn't be wholesale blocked. But DSPs will learn over the course of the next 6 to 12 months that the quality of advertising on this site has deteriorated.
Right. And it comes down, I mean, the buyer outcome is critical here too. And I think making sure that, I think part of that is making sure that ad experiences are viewable and there, what other things that you can do within your control to make those, the intent might not be as there for, as if it were organic traffic. But again, maybe that's something within your control, right? On the publisher side to ensure that the user experience when there are ads are going to not just speak to vanity metrics like viewability, but have an understanding. And I think we'll talk about that in a little bit about having a feedback loop between buyers and publishers to understand what kind of traffic is performing and get a little bit more feedback on performance to focus on that, just given today's reality of where everything is shifting in terms of the traffic sources. Great, thank you, Chris, for that perspective. And Rachel, a minute ago, Lindsay mentioned quality standards being higher than ever. Making sure you have good quality content. I know publishers are using AI today, but could be getting dinged for just mishmash of AI content that's clearly not written by humans. So in your opinion, what are the most important quality factors to keep in mind when it comes to content creation for you at AMU?
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, exceptional content will always have a leg up. And I hesitate in some ways because I don't want to sound Pollyanna. And I also want to make very clear that there are publishers out there creating exceptional content and they still are struggling. And so that's what's really tough, because it's like I'm playing by all of the rules. And it's still this frustrating experience. But I do think fundamentally we've gone through so many sea changes in a publishing industry. And at the end of the day, the things that matter the most, and I'm a total, editor and writer at my core. And so it's like, I just think that there are really no shortcuts. And I think that maybe there is a model that will work where you are able to buy traffic and rely on that, but it's a short-term win. And I think, speaking from where we are at AMU, we're incredibly lucky because we work with comic creators and advice columnists and puzzle constructors who are like the best of the best and have global name recognition. And also their products also do. So when people search for Calvin and Hobbes, for example, they're going to want to click through to read Calvin and Hobbes. If they search for a puzzle, they are going to click through so that they can play that puzzle. And so I think the biggest things for other publishers who may not have that sort of differentiation with their brand that we are so blessed to have, is to really think very critically about what is that brand differentiation. I think gone are the days where big publishers, and I worked at some of them in the past, where it was like, let's cover everything. Like, let's just cover, I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but it's like, fashion, food, home design, technology, beauty, everything. And then it was like, oh my gosh, we're trying to be so much. Like I said at the top of the call, we're trying to be so much that we're not anything to anyone. And so I think there is a really important distinction now to make of like how that pendulum is shifting back to very niche quality content. What is your brand? What is your perspective? What are you trying to give to your user? What questions are they asking that only you can provide the answer for? And all of that, I have to believe at my core, and again, this is where it gets a little Pollyanna, I have to believe at my core that that will win the day. Because that's what Google's looking for, right? When you talk about the helpful content update, and when you also look at the ways that they say, and I do believe are trying to sniff out AI content, ultimately they're looking to see that your users are searching for something, they're going to your site, and your users are staying on that site because you've provided them with the answer they're looking for. And that only comes from quality content that is written, created by a human and for a human. Again, I just don't think that there's really any way around it.
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you made a good point, and Lindsay called this too. It's about having a brand and not just this watered down content. You're trying to cover too many topics.
For sure.
And you don't have a brand where people think, well, I want to, organically just imagine that, type in the site into my search bar and go directly there. And I think an interesting thing to get away from a doom and gloom, I like to be a glass half full person, is thinking about, with MFA and publishers who spend a lot of time on their brand and quality content. There was such a proliferation of websites that happened, that popped up and started to disperse traffic and brand dollars, as I'm sure Chris has seen. But if you contract that and weed out the sites that are literally made just to steal like the money and the dollars, if you are focusing on your brand, hopefully then the peanut butter won't be spread as thin, I guess, across that.
I think that's a really key point. There are zero conversations I've had ever with a buyer on the buy side of the market who said they're suffering from a supply shortage of web inventory. And so I have no doubt that the publishers on this call are experiencing a decline in traffic. Nobody on the buy side has a clue that that is happening. There's still so much excess supply, and there's the same amount of money leaving DSPs today as there was 6 months ago. This is a reallocation issue. And that reallocation issue, I imagine, I don't have the perspective. I want to learn more, but that must be very, very painful for publishers who are on the losing end of that. There are also publishers on the winning end of it. Like, the same amount of money is leaving DSPs each day.
Yeah, that's not growing. So I think, what could be a headwind right now maybe becomes not completely, but a semi tailwind for publishers who are really thinking about the consumer and a good experience, that hopefully, even if you do have to buy traffic, also focused on quality ad experiences on your site that should drive buyer outcomes. Going back to the point, Chris, that you got asked at your webinar of, isn't everything made for ads? Sure. But, you could put 50 ads on a page. Like, that's not, you want to have a better.
Not everything's made for advertising. Most websites are made for consumers. And there's a balance as a publisher that genuine publishers have to trade off. And I think Rachel touched on one of the most resilient things that's happening now. The publishers that produce content that isn't particularly differentiated and that can be summarized effectively by Google get hurt. And I'm sure that's
Exactly.
painful, but that's a vulnerable business.
Mhm.
Publisher, like desktop gaming, as far as I can tell, is cleaning up right now. That is not a product that generative search can replicate. You
That's
go there and you spend time, like long periods of time, playing solitaire or whatever it is. I realize, like, not, a lifestyle publisher can't transform into a gaming publisher. I do appreciate this, but there
Mhm.
are types of publishers that are very much benefiting from the decline in referral traffic from Facebook and Google and others.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
Rachel mentioned before a little bit back to the future, but also almost that we've been saying the same things for a while, and the if scale of traffic is under attack, it's going to be much more about the value you can create on your site. And we're saying the same things as before, like invest in editorial, invest in your own real estate and back on the website. I was going to say real fast, one of the biggest hits I've seen in looking at all the traffic that there's very much traffic publishers that have grown in traffic this year, to your point, Chris, but also the publishers that were just rewriting or reorganizing thought leaders, like the true publishers that had the brand authority. Those publishers have taken huge hits when you were just like recirculating the same news. And as much as that does hurt for them, I have literally been telling them for a decade that this strategy won't go on. You've just taken these other news sources, and now that's what Google will do, and it's making that middle tier, the not boots on the ground, the ones that those ones have hit this year, hurt.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's important to remember too is the user experience once people get to your site, which benefits the advertisers and the user. And so that's something to not forget. Like, what is your overall UX and design of your site? Is it something that's easily digestible? Are people able to get the information that they're looking for quickly and easily? And so that's just, that user experience is something that I just wanted to make sure that we talk about too. It's not just the content, it's how the content is displayed and presented on your site.
And now the competitor is Google landscape, right? Why do they want to be on a website where I just got 2 pop-ups, a newsletter, email subscription thing, like all these things, and the SERP itself, Google, the font size is big, it's clear, I can see I'm not being bombarded. Like, users will have to want to be on a website, right? Exactly what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we had a question from Jody. Hi, Jody, about how do ads play into user experience. I mean, I think, Chris, I touched on this a little bit, right? Where, we want to make sure that if you do drive traffic to your site, that you have ads that are not just vanity metrics like viewability, but, I don't know, Chris, what would your take be on how ads play into user experience and buyer outcomes?
So I think there are 2 things here. One of them, Heather, is borrowing something you were setting up earlier. First, I think it sure looks like product. Both matter, obviously, but if you deliver a highly engaged user to a page that has aggressive advertising, I think we'd all feel not great about that experience, but like, it works. Like, it actually influences their behavior. Like, they seem to be engaged and notice these ads, and those ads influence their purchase decisions. And the opposite's true as well. Like, if you source a non-engaged user through some sort of like low quality traffic sourcing mechanism, even a pristine ad experience tends not to perform. And that is not intuitive to me. I would have guessed the opposite several years ago. But I think the bigger thing, Heather, is borrowing what you were saying earlier. I don't think publishers have anything close to reliable feedback from the buy side of the market to inform these decisions. Publishers are told to have brand safe content, to have high viewability, to have high video completion rates. And like, it turns out that if you do those things really well, you get called made for advertising and everybody blocks you. Like, that's been the level of feedback that publishers have gotten historically. And I'm not sure any publisher has a mechanism today for sort of like rigorously testing different ways of sourcing traffic and constructing a page and managing refresh rates and like all the details that publishers spend a lot of time thinking about. I don't think any publisher has a robust way of really experimenting with like, what are the ways that I can kind of like construct a user experience that maximize the value for marketers. It's just a massive blind spot in like the feedback loop in the industry.
Yeah, I think, Chris, you had mentioned, and I could have this wrong, so correct me, or that there was some potentially like IAB or other conversations, early days being discussed about, is there a way to maybe pass something in the programmatic, in a bid request, or
yeah, there's a proposal floating through IAB Tech Lab working groups now, which, the details are still being worked out. But like conceptually, the idea is like each auction, each bid request that goes to a DSP should declare the origination of this session: organic traffic, email, Outbrain, Facebook. And I think, if there were trust across the whole industry, this could be really effective. This could create a really useful mechanism for DSPs or agencies to feedback, to Andrews McMeel or to whomever publisher, like, oh, hey, when you source traffic from Pinterest, it performs unbelievably well for us. And it's so much better than when you source traffic from this other. That I am skeptical that there's enough trust, though, to make that happen. And I think that the more sort of like cynical view on this thing is this is simply a mechanism that will result in large buyers blocking paid traffic. There's truth to both of these things, but the constructive outcome requires there to be a lot of trust between publishers and buyers. I'm not sure that trust is really there.
And Chris, do you think that's because, and I'll be fully transparent, this is something that I'm learning a lot about. And you think that distrust comes from, where do you think that distrust comes from?
I think there's a long history of publishers being mysteriously blocked by a bunch of black box systems. Brand safety, IVT, viewability. Why would this be any different?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, it should be different, but it's like the buy side needs to sort of like do some work here to regain some trust of publishers. Like if the buy side is looking for publishers to self-declare new information, there needs to be either a very big stick to say, we're shutting you off completely if you don't do this, which is very much on the table, or a really credible carrot to say, like, we're going to give you back richness that you didn't have before, so you really understand the business practices that drive outcomes for marketers.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's such a spectrum of what paid traffic is and where it comes from my perspective. Like, so, if there's paid search or paid social, chances are that is going to, hopefully, let's just say that you've got create content on your site that is high quality, written by humans for humans. You're feeling really great about it and it's not performing organically, say on Facebook, right? So you're going to boost that post, or you're going to do something to put a little bit of money behind it to get it to perform a little bit more. That's still going to content that is really good. And so it's like, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud in terms of like, that dollar is going behind boosting content that is still very quality. And
completely
so
agree with that. I think intuitively it totally checks out. We've had only a few chances to like rigorously study this. The best example, I should probably keep anonymous, but it was a really high scale, really clean experiment, very much a household name publisher, very premium content. Like all of us here would feel good about it. For a period of several months, they just happened to monetize their inventory in a way where it was clear when they were, is the identical article, like same page URL, whether it was being monetized through, whether it was an organic session or a paid Facebook session. The paid Facebook traffic had 70% lower conversion rates for marketers. Everything else is the same, same ad load, same content, high quality. It's just the paid traffic performs much, much worse.
Yeah.
There has to be a way to do this in a way that creates outcomes for marketers. There has to be, but we're not going to guess our way into it. Like, we need like robust feedback systems so that like you can do an experiment and then some DSP can say like, oh, that experiment didn't work at all. But like, try it this other. Oh, that there's some promise there. Now tweak it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Jody called out in the comments here that it's still about the proposal giving more and maybe not getting back. I think about CTV too, of like pass more granular segments, like show level data instead of genre. And it's like, I've seen this movie before. You want me to give you all the things. And then, that's where you come back to the trust, Chris, is, if you give it, is the reciprocity going to be there? And maybe there's a way to do it, maybe not. But I think it is nice to be able to get a little bit of that feedback loop to help refine these strategies, and knowing that, publishers are going to have to buy traffic, but it's, how to, being able to get feedback from the buy side on performance will help to kind of tweak that mix, that kind of recipe that publishers have to move toward. Obviously,
my hunch is that this thing, I mean, there's a big prize for the publisher who figures out how to source high volumes of traffic in a way that performs for marketers. And that's going to be a really valuable trade secret to the publisher who figures it out. My hunch is that those publishers who figure out this formula will discover these things in very sort of like proprietary, secret, certainly not IAB Tech Lab standardized ways. They'll work closely with a handful of buyers and they'll sort of like test their way into it. And then they'll keep it as a trade secret.
Yeah, that makes sense. You have to have your special sauce, and as much as I'm a fan of open source and sharing these things, but hopefully there'll be interesting ways of figuring that out, or even a publisher working directly with a buyer on a one-to-one basis, right? Figuring out a partner and stress testing it on a smaller scale. Right now, just send it all and every bid request to every buyer everywhere. It could be, keep it pretty isolated and have publishers lean on those big relationships that they have. I mean, you could buy your own traffic, I suppose.
One of the things that I think is becoming a bigger and bigger market force is the very largest publishers can make some fixed cost investments to do these sorts of things, just like staff up a team to do like some pretty complicated A/B testing and work closely with buyers. The very smallest publishers, of course, don't have those resources, but through partnership with Freestar or others, can kind of get the benefit of being part of a gigantic collection of experimentation where the fixed cost makes sense. The mid-market publishers are the ones that struggle here. The mid-market publishers are the ones that just don't have the resources to sort of compete on equal footing with the giant publishers, but also aren't ready to sort of like outsource some of these responsibilities to a company like Freestar. And that's I think the little publishers are going to be fine. I think the big ones are going to be fine too. It's the mid-market that I think is in for a rough road.
Jennifer has a good comment in there. She mentioned for the advertisers are putting more dollars behind influencer sponsorships and in content. I think looking at like how native works versus what we know about influencers, there was just the issue too, though, and don't we think this will become like even greater, more exposed, is that they couldn't, to Chris's point, they don't drive good results for the marketer. You can have someone with millions of likes but can't sell one product. There's been lots of studies behind the actual the conversion behind influencer marketing. So I don't know. What I will say about search though, and where it kind of has gone together, is that all of a sudden, I speak all of a sudden, like in the last year, I've heard a lot more about getting the individual expert to shine through the website a little bit more, like the about me versus about us page concept of trusting, like users will trust humans, like the one-to-one versus this big brand. And so there's something in there to still speak that there could be power to like an influencer model, but I don't know that has been any more successful in how they've proved out the value for brands.
Yeah, Lindsay, I think that's a great point. that again, as we look at human content, it's like, we also want to know who those humans are. And again, I'm speaking at this from the organic perspective, but how do you get your audience to know who the people are who are creating this content and that they are an expert? Because I think for so long there were pieces created that were kind of like those aggregate pieces, re-reporting the news, re-reporting things, re-reporting trends, re-reporting stories from other outlets and that sort of thing. And now it's, again, going back to that quality content. I mean, in some ways, as a purist at heart, I'm like, this is the way that it should be going. This is the way that we should be creating content, and we should be looking at our brands. And this is what we should have been doing all along. And we all got kind of waylaid because of the shifts that we had to do when Google told us to change, and when Facebook told us to change, and when we were so beholden to the traffic, and we are still so beholden to the traffic. I think the key, and kind of what you're talking about, Chris, the key is like, what is that mix of traffic sources and content, and also just revenue model that benefits the user, the publisher, and the marketers? And whew, if we all had the answers, then, I could just retire today, but
I say things like the glory days of traffic, like it was such a era in the sense of so many net new users, more than ever, right? We're just starting the internet. That just became, in the last 20 years, where you had these mass amounts of new people starting to search.
Yeah.
That's plateaued. And then you have the Facebooks and all of that kind of decentralized, might be the next step there. Lots of other, I believe, publishers will evolve and find a place.
For sure. I think so.
Different.
Yeah. And I think this comment that just that's on here about maybe our future looks like less traffic of much higher quality users. And yes, that's kind of what I believe is, this is just me personally believing this, that like, maybe we won't have as big audiences as we did before, but we're going to have audiences of people who like really want to be there. So it's like a party, right? It's like, do you want to throw like a huge rager with like a bunch of people you don't know? Or do you want to like throw a dinner party with like your best friends, and you have a much higher quality time and you get a lot more out of it? I don't know. Again,
and closer audience relationships where you can,
for sure.
have a value exchange of ads, but then also additional content. And then maybe over time that grows as word of mouth and, sharing newsletters and you might see that contraction of sites that just exploded, that didn't bring a lot of quality, and then shrink that down a little bit. And maybe the comment I made before, you're not spreading your peanut butter thin across so many sites, and those that are actually creating brands and quality content will survive.
That's my hope.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I have one closing question for fun, which should just take a couple of minutes, and then we can leave it open for agree. By the way, Jennifer, Google should pay us for content creators. We talked about that a little bit right before everybody joined, but yes, and maybe there needs to be a bigger collective publisher push on regulations around that. And I think there's a lot of AI and other and obviously Google has a lot going on their end in the antitrust and other front. So I definitely think publishers could continue to band together on those initiatives 100%. So I'll give a closing question to all of the panelists here, and then we can go into any questions from there. So for my closing question, we are upon holiday season. So in that vein, would love to hear from you guys, kind of a wish list for publishing or ad tech as we move into 2024. You cannot say that you hope Google doesn't actually deprecate the cookie. It's cheating, although I do hear it might get punted to 2025. Don't quote me on it. I'm sure you've all read some of the stories. But anyway, outside of that, would love to hear, maybe Chris from you from an ad tech perspective. What would be on your, wish list, ideal things that could happen moving into next year?
I think for the overall health of the industry, sort of like the most needle moving thing that could happen, which is positioned as a real possibility, is for buyers to move away to reduce their dependence on some of the automation, and to be willing to apply more human oversight to deciding what they're going to buy, and just to be like concrete about that. Moving to inclusion lists, moving the default setting of campaigns at an agency level or an individual brand level to a human curated list of websites and apps that are maybe not individually known to the buyer, because you do want to reach out into the long tail, but that are managed by companies that you trust. And that could include some of the biggest publishers on the internet. It can include sales houses. It could include mid-market publishers, but that the buyer would make a human scale number of choices, 50 to 100 portfolios that I really trust, and that are going to be the default pool of supply that receives my programmatic investments. There is for sure collateral damage to that approach. I think the industry at large, buyers, sellers, and ad tech platforms would gain so much more than we'd lose if the industry moved in that direction.
I like that. We talk a lot about that, of a mix of automation, but you still need humans, right? Like AI is great, but you still kind of need that human approach.
The reason to be optimistic about that one is I think the MFA fiasco has given marketers some confidence that like it's okay to be a marketer. It's okay to make like your intuition's more right than it's wrong, and that you should really be confident applying some human oversight to the automation. You need automation, but like it's appropriate and necessary to also use your marketing intuition here as well.
Awesome. Lindsay?
Okay. Rachel, you'll like mine. You mentioned Lily Ray earlier, and this kind of so mine in broad theory was something along the lines of, I hope my wish list, or my wish for publishers, to stop taking shortcuts and really to just like once and for all decide to be the grown-up publishers, the ones that want to take brand and business and advertiser needs and all of its UX, all of it serious, based on this later trend of, I don't even want to like give this word any more attention, but parasite SEO, where you have domains that are like selling out like a directory of their site.
Yeah.
Did you see the one Lily Ray posted about the Dallas News, and how like even news site that's all of a sudden ranking for like best sofas?
I know.
And, like, because they've rented out an area of their website to spammy content, but it's ranking at the top of Google. And so it's like this, I don't know who to blame. Like, why isn't Google blocking that out? But also, what are you doing, Daily News? Do you want to be around or not? I don't know. So that's I could go on and on, but certainly like lean into quality, dig deep, do the hard work. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, this is a little bit of an aside, but it's like when I have a Google search set up for any of our brands, and then I see some of the sites that are like talking about puzzles, and I'm like, what? Like, you're just trying to capitalize on this. Like, leave us alone and create your own puzzles.
Everyone should get into desktop gaming. I think that's what I heard Chris say.
There you go.
A proliferation tomorrow of desktop gaming sites.
Yeah, just don't compete with us, please. I would prefer that. Thank you. Thank you very much. For me, I think my wish list is just that, Lindsay, like that we as publishers get to kind of go back to what we went into publishing to do, and kind of stop trying to game the system. I think we all love creating content, and I think in some ways this is like treating it as a fun opportunity to experiment and see what works outside of the things that we've been doing for so long, because the Facebooks and the Googles of the world were giving us a ton of traffic. And so now we're having to think a little bit more strategically and creatively. And it forces us outside of our roles, which can be something incredibly intimidating and challenging and exciting and fun. So my wish list is that, yeah, I just get to, honestly, my wish list is that I get to play around and create more content and that it works. That's my wish list. Yeah.
Great. All right, we have a few minutes left. Any questions we missed? People feel free to unmute if you want to ask directly, or if we missed any of your questions along the way. Don't be shy.
Someone had a question back here. I don't think we addressed it. Did we talk about the one that says how much percentage of bot traffic makes publishers? I don't think there's a percentage. Is that the answer?
Yeah, I think Chris talked through, like, buying traffic is a subset of what you define as MFA, but then it comes to ad density on the site. It comes to really like the most important part about being about buyer outcomes. Right.
Yeah, I think like buying traffic is a prereq. It's one of those like necessary but not sufficient things. Like you need to be buying a lot of paid traffic and do a bunch of other relatively aggressive things beyond that.
But I think at the same time too, if you have a higher percentage of paid traffic, at the end of the day, it's not going to perform as well as organic traffic in terms of buyer outcomes, which is really what we want. You know, if you want advertisers to keep coming back and spending, you know, if those outcomes aren't there because of a high proportion of paid traffic, you know, that's in and of itself going to not help the website continue to sustain. But yeah, there's multiple factors outside of just paid. But I think if you're pretty,
I think the other way to think about paid traffic is if the business case for investing in paid traffic requires your payback period to be this session, that's an arbitrage business model, which could still might not be MFA, but like that starts to get you pretty close to MFA, and you probably need to monetize things pretty aggressively if you're expecting to fully recoup your traffic acquisition costs in a single session. If the payback period is a week or a month, on the bet that like you're building an organic audience that will be back, that's very fundamentally different. And it's hard to measure those things on the buy side, but like you would know that on the sell side. Like, what is the business model associated or the business bet associated with paid traffic? Is it short-term arbitrage, or is it actually an investment in trying to build out an organic audience?
I like that a lot. I like it said that way.
yeah, I do too. I think that's great. All right, well, we have 1 minute left. Aaron made a great comment, you know, about other countries. I think we see this, other countries not in the US, sort of like with GDPR, slowly moves to the US. I think that's a good precedent to set of Australia, you know, content being paid for by Facebook. So I think that's something for publishers to continue to work together on and push for.
I agree. Search generative experience will be interesting. How much Google truly chooses after all the dollars that went into like, I don't know, content and SEO and like, you know, trying to corral web people to like site owners to do things the right way. They're going to fully turn their back on organic ranking in a way, or if they're going to incorporate, there's different like perspectives and keep it flowing in a way that encourages clicks. But if not, and even if so, I think there will be a lot more conversations about licensing deals from Facebook's, from Google's, from all of the different platforms. And publishers should absolutely be keeping in mind, standing up for your content and for your dollars while also.
DC.
What's that?
I said head to DC, band together.
Yeah.
Demand. I think Beeler's taking a trip down there sometime. Down there from where I'm at, by the way, you know, sometime soon. But anyway, I appreciate, you know, Chris, Rachel, Lindsay, thank you for your perspective, for joining today. Thank you, everybody who dialed in. Appreciate you listening in. Don't hesitate to email us if you have any questions, or email me directly. after we follow up, and any other questions you have, we will try to answer those. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you very much again to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.